This particular 10 years later video is going to be a little bit different than some of the ones that you've seen in the past. For every previous video in this series, when I would listen to an album for a 10 years later video, it was my first time listening to the album. In this case though, this is the first time that I will be talking about an album that I previously listened to before writing the script for this video, and also the first time where I'll be talking about an album that I previously reviewed before filming this video. This will come up again in the future, of course. At some point it might even become a pretty regular thing, but hey, this is the first time, so let's just jump right in, shall we? Welcome back to 10 years later. You guys know this series by now. It's where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And again, having listened to this album several times over previously, I was pretty excited to revisit it for this video. As you can tell by the title, the album that we'll be talking about today is the 2010 debut Drake album, Thank Me Later. At this point, I don't need to introduce Drake. I've discussed him several times over on my blog and on this channel. You guys know him extremely well. He's perhaps one of the most enduring superstars of the 2010s and perhaps the biggest hip-hop star of the 2010s. I'm gonna be honest, just an anecdote real quick. There was a point around 2012 when I was in early high school, and I had noticed that Drake hadn't been releasing all that much in the then recent time period, and a part of me had wondered if he was going to be one of those guys that had his big moment but would just kind of plateau. Little did I realize what was in store, as Drake would go on to achieve popularity that few artists have achieved, with chart success comparable to that of legends like Michael Jackson and the Beatles. Say what you will about Drake as an artist, say what you will about Drake as a person, but this man has certainly etched his name in music's history, and he's continued to shine and achieve massive success well over a decade into his career. In doing my research though, perhaps my 2012 thoughts of Drake plateauing may not have been completely unfounded. Even as someone that at the time didn't know too much about hip-hop and was only slightly familiar with Drake's music, it seems I wasn't the only one that could have doubted Drake at the time. In fact, I don't think people would have expected Drake to even get to that point as it was. For some history, Drake released his 2009 mixtape So Far Gone without a label to back it, and later Lil Wayne took a huge chance on him by signing him to Young Money Entertainment. It might not seem like it, but that was quite a risk at the time, as coming into this album's release, Drake was a bit of an anomaly in hip-hop. Predominantly a genre focused so heavily on artists with macho, unafraid images of themselves. Drake certainly had some braggadocio, but his music was also more emotional, introspective, and even self-deprecating. Far more so than that of a typical hip-hop record at the time. And sure, he wasn't the first to do this. Kanye West had done it with 808s and Heartbreak, and Kid Cudi did it with Man on the Moon, The End of Day, both of which are records it's hard to imagine Drake existing without. But Drake's fusions of hip-hop and R&B made him an interesting character in the rap game, one who got a bit of the meme treatment for being more of a softie than other hip-hop artists. And it seems that even he was uncertain about whether or not he would make it. On the same day as this record's release, Drake released a non-album single, 9 AM in Dallas, the first in his AM/PM series, and there's a point on the song where he raps a set of bars about being worried that his first record, sure to be an important and dare it be said historic release in hip-hop, wouldn't do the numbers everyone expects, and that he'll turn out to be a fluke. Let the record show as I sit and tell you the tale today that Drake did not turn out to be a fluke. As for all that you can say about him today, and trust me, there is a lot to say, Drake has continued to be a massive driving force in hip-hop for the entirety of the last decade. Now, I listened to some Drake back in the day when this came out, mostly a few of the big singles from this record as well as some of the features that he had, but it took me a very long time to actually get around to listening to his records more fully. Again, back in the early 2010s, I wasn't much of a hip-hop listener. I reviewed this album back in 2018 because I wanted to review all of Drake's records in preparation for Scorpion. You can check out the old written review of it at the link in the description, but after reviewing it, I found it to be a good record that, even if it had some generic moments, still held up well and succeeded in spite of its flaws. Here's where we get to the fun part of the 10 years later videos on albums that I have previously listened to and or reviewed. Beyond just talking about my thoughts on the record and reviewing it, I'll spend some of this time discussing how the record endured in my regular rotation of music. There have been plenty of times where I've reviewed an album, and no matter how much I enjoyed it when I wrote the review, I ended up not returning to it much. I don't know why, it just is what it is. That said, in the case of Thank Me Later, that did not happen. This is a record I've continuously come back to, as the high points are just too enjoyable for me to ignore. It's a 14-track record that lasts just over an hour. Remember when Drake Drake didn't bloat out his albums to oblivion. And again, there have been some songs on this record that I have absolutely loved and come back to time and time and time again. Find Your Love was a massively enduring single for me. I enjoyed this song way back even when I was just a casual Drake fan, and even now it still pops for me. I love the somewhat dancehall inspired Kanye West produced beat on the song. Drake's chorus remains one of the most sticky ones that he's crafted, and his vocal melodies are insanely catchy. More so than that track, I've given a lot of return visits to Shut It Down featuring The Dream, which despite being about 7 minutes is absolutely heavenly, and I still adore it in spite of its length. The instrumental is ethereal, Drake and The Dream both sound excellent, and the beat switch near the end that leads into this atmospheric, delicate passage is honestly such an underrated moment in Drake's discography. Though I will say one thing that isn't underrated on the song is this one cringe bar where Drake compliments a girl by saying that she's finer than her fine cousin. I mean, let it not be said that Drake is the smoothest, most romantic man on the planet, but that line just sounds like an open invitation to get punched in the face, potentially twice. Goofy lyric aside though, the song is great, and when it comes to spacey, ethereal tracks, I've also spent plenty of time with The Resistance, which also has a chorus that I've gotten stuck in my head all too many times. I love Drake's transitions between singing and rapping on the song. The atmospheric beat is great, and while I mentioned in my initial review that some of the lyrics, which prominently featured Drake talking about how people think that the fame has changed him, weren't the best in his discography, I at least appreciate them in the sense that Drake is so willing to outwardly display his flaws in a genre where many artists portray themselves as having no flaws and being superhuman types superior to anyone that dares oppose them. And in that regard of Drake's openness, how about the intro track Fireworks? This is another one I've given plenty of listens to, as the light but still punchy beat is potent. I love Drake's passionate verses as he discusses the way money's changed him, a fling he had with Rihanna, and even his relationship with his parents. There are quite a few standout lyrics, but one I've always appreciated is this couplet where Drake talks about how Lil Wayne put him on and how he hopes his own success doesn't alter their relationship. It's been said plenty of times, but hip-hop is a very competitive genre to the point where many consider it sport, and it seems like there's so many times where hip-hop artists don't want to give credit to other artists. They want to be better, they want to one-up everyone. But in the case of Drake, he spent a lot of time in his career wanting to put other artists on. There are a lot of big artists today whose careers were very much helped by major cosigns from Drake. Artists like The Weeknd, Kendrick Lamar, Party Next Door, Lil Baby. Even if some artists like Blockboy JB only became one-hit wonders, at least Drake helped put them on. And that kind of traces back to the fact that Lil Wayne helped put him on. And I think with a song like this, it can be refreshing when a rapper gives credit like Drake does, because he's continued to say that if not for Lil Wayne taking a chance on him, he wouldn't be where he is. So it's nice to see him give Lil Wayne credit, and it's even nicer to see that the two of them have continued to have a strong relationship to this day. One of the lines in this song that definitely aged nicely. Top the song off with smooth singing from Drake and a stunning earworm of a chorus from Alicia Keys, and you've got a pretty potent album opener for sure. Beyond those, there are a few other tracks I considered favorites when I first reviewed the album that I haven't returned to as much as some of the aforementioned ones, though that's not out of malice. I still do enjoy them very much. Up All Night is one of the biggest bangers on the album, and it still retains its punch. The beat is bouncy, Drake's verse is one of the better ones on the album, the hook is still catchy, and Nicki Minaj's verse on the song is still charismatic. Her changing flows and fun punchlines are still great, and the song remains very strong for me. And CeCe's interlude, even if it's a short track, is one that I definitely enjoy. The song remains very ethereal, a lot of the light emotional vibes are still great. Drake's vocals remain very pretty. I also love the guitars on the bridge of the song, they're a very nice touch. Even though I haven't returned to it as much as some of the other songs on here, I think I might need to correct that. There are also a heap of tracks that I didn't previously consider favorites or least favorites, and I'd still say I don't really consider them as standouts in either direction, even if a few of them have grown on me. For example, Over, the big debut single from the album, I think the hook here is really catchy, Drake's flows and performances have grown on me a bit, and I do really like the grand instrumentals. I remember liking them at first when I heard Eminem sample them on Despicable, but I feel like Drake's verses aren't as interesting to me as the hook is. There's not much to them that gets me really excited, but I do see why this song has had an everlasting appeal, and even if it's not one of my favorites, it has grown on me at least a little bit. Show Me a Good Time also has grown on me just a little bit. I do like the upbeat feel and the atmosphere of it, and if nothing else, the vocals on the hook are catchy, but there's still something about it that holds it back from being a true highlight for me. In my initial review, I mentioned that I didn't care much for the beat. I do think I like it a bit more now, just not enough to make the song a standout. Fancy is a Swizz Beatz produced track that led to the very mimetic phrase, "Oh, you fancy, huh?" that I heard all too often when I was in middle school. My thoughts thoughts on it remain more or less the same as what they were before. The beat is pretty fantastic, Swizz Beatz' hook is catchy, Drake sounds fine, T.I.'s guest verse remains a high point, but I'd say the song is held back a little bit by the fact that it just feels like it goes on too long. It's still kind of fun though, and I see why people would enjoy it. Miss Me is one of Drake's bigger singles from the album, and one of his noteworthy collaborations with Lil Wayne. Again, the grand beat is pretty solid here, and while the chorus has grown on me a little bit, it's another track that to me just feels fine but not really totally special. Drake's flow is decent even though it feels like his verse goes on a bit too long. Wayne has some fun too, but again, some of the lyrics are pretty cringy. Like, I'm sure the sex is great, but hearing a lyric where you describe a woman as sucking the brown off you, just wow. I'm just glad you agree that it's nasty. I don't think I want to hear anyone describe getting their dick sucked in that gratuitous detail. And the album's closer, Thank Me Now, plays like a number of Drake's closing tracks, where it's a very introspective look at his personal life in a mostly freestyle-like format. He spends this one asking fans to thank him for his music in the case that he's never able to make another album. So much for that thought process. Again though, my thoughts on this one are about the same as before. I like the celebratory vibe of the instrumental, as well as Drake's confident performance, but I just wish the song had a better chorus because that would make it easier to return to for me. It's still an appropriate closer, just not one of my favorite tracks on the album. And I'll also admit, when I first reviewed this record, I found that there were definitely some lowlights, and hearing some of those lowlights back now, my thoughts on them still just about stand. Karaoke is a track produced by Francis and the Lights back at a time when Drake wasn't completely at odds with good music, and I kind of see why I wasn't crazy about it before. Drake's auto-tune assisted vocals feel a bit goofy on this one. The rap verse feels kind of jarring, and while the beat is a little bit more colorful, it just sounds weird and not exactly flattering to Drake. Even if it's another moody and mellow track like some of the ones I like from Drake, this one just feels boring. Unforgettable is a Jeezy featured tribute to R&B music. Its title references the legendary Nat King Cole classic, and it also features a sampling of vocals from Aaliyah. Again though, I don't think the song totally sticks the landing, even though the instrumental has some moody vibes and some of Drake's melodies on the chorus are catchy. I just think the song is a bit boring and it's not the best that I've heard out of Drake or Jeezy. And Light Up is a Jay-Z featured banger, and while the beat is catchy, I'm still not in love with this song. Drake's chorus is dope, but I don't really care much for his verse or some of his cheesy lyrics like this one about being a star, no spangled banner. Jay-Z's verse is cool, but it still feels like that verse is the only thing that makes the song worth coming back to for me. Overall, my thoughts on Thank Me Later remain mostly the same as those expressed in my original review in 2018. I wouldn't say re-listening to the album has made me forget some of the flaws that I previously had with this album, like the general inconsistency of it and Drake's lackluster lyricism. That said, I think the fact that my thoughts on the album are the same as before kind of doubles as a good thing, because I enjoyed the album then and I still enjoy it now. If anything, I think the highs on this record have remained extremely enjoyable, and even if there are some low points, a few tracks have grown on me at least a little bit. All in all, it's still an enjoyable album for its time that still sounds good today. I love a lot of the atmospheric vibes of the instrumentals. Drake's vocals still sound nice even if they are a little bit undercooked and not as solid as the Drake of today. And even if Drake wasn't the best lyricist at the time, he still had some catchy rap flows, and his ability to switch solidly between crooning and rapping was pretty solid stuff. I wouldn't call it a Drake classic, in fact it's pretty far from it, but I still think Drake put out a pretty good debut with this record, and I think the album established at the time that Drake wasn't just a fluke, and he wasn't just someone you could write off. I guess I can say it, but way to go, Drake. As the self-proclaimed hardest act to follow, you definitely made your point with this album. Back in 2010, I was marginally into Drake. He was one of those artists people didn't really know I listened to, but I enjoyed him once in a while. I can imagine my younger self would have been fine with this record. When I reviewed it in early 2018, I enjoyed myself with it, and even if I didn't love it as much as I would end up loving some of Drake's other albums, I thought it was worthy of a good rating. And now I'd say my thoughts on the record remain more or less the same, even if a few of my thoughts are a little bit more positive. And I can say that I stand by the good rating that I gave it back then. There are more than enough high points on the album to make it worth returning to, and even if it's not revolutionary, it remains a strong debut from one of the biggest stars of the decade. But that's just my opinion on this album. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it then? Do you listen to it now? Did you love it then? Hate it then? Love it now? Hate it now? What are your stories? What are your experiences with this album? Leave them down in the comments. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. As for what's next in this series, looking at my list, the next album that I will be talking about is Eminem's Recovery. Very interested to check that one out, as I haven't listened to it in its entirety yet, and I know it's a pretty polarizing one, so I'm interested interested to get in on the conversation myself. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.